RFK's FDA has announced it's officially going to re-examine 25 years of data on abortion medication. What could go wrong?
Plenty, especially when this administration of unfuckables are also pushing to reclassify IUDs and birth control as abortion.
Plus, this week, Pete Hegseth turned his destroying women in the military amp up to 11. And we have Kyleanne Hunter, CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, to talk about the latest sexism shenanigans coming out of the Department of War, Defense, Detritus, whatever we're calling it now.
And to sort of lighten up the mood, comedian and author Youngmi Mayer is here to chat about her memoir, I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying, and man, are we ever.
We are. All that coming up on the Feminist Buzzkills podcast, the show that will never be Sinclair Broadcasting's bitch.
Hell no.
Hell no. I'm Liz Winstead, and that other hell no is my co-host Moji Alawodale. Moji!
Hi, Liz. Welcome back. We haven't been on the pod together in ever.
I know, it feels like it was forever, and I think it was. It was
Yes.
like, I think since we did OpSave at Netroots and...
a whole other season. I was wearing sleeveless clothes outside at that time of year.
That's right. And now we're fall. I don't love, but it's not surprising that like the second I return to the podcast, there is just more straight, white, liberalish men just thinking they did something with these crazy hot takes. And Ezra Klein is the reigning champ of this for a second week in a row.
Oh my gosh. I don't believe that he opened his mouth and said what he said and essentially shitted all over us, Liz. That's essentially what he was doing.
Last week he said Charlie Kirk's good at politics. And then this week, well,
Charlie Kirk isn't a politician. Wasn't.
no. Well, let's just play what he said this week.
A lot of the people who embrace alarm don't embrace what I think obviously follows from that alarm, which is the willingness to make strategic and political decisions you find personally discomforting, even though they are obviously more likely to help you win, right? Taking political positions that'll make it more likely to win Senate seats in Kansas and Ohio and Missouri. Trying to open your coalition to people you didn't want it open to before, running pro-life Democrats.
I missed Ezra Klein's foot and mouth last week, Liz. Thanks for reminding me.
You know what, Moji? It really takes a white dude to say that we need to open our coalition, which, first of all, opening my coalition feels like something I'm going to start saying when I want to get laid. I'm going to open my coalition. Why would we open our coalition to anyone who wants to destroy our bodily autonomy in the name of ending fascism?
Also, why are we, the victims of fascism, also the sacrifices to fascism? That doesn't work as a building coalition. So what I'm hearing is that Ezra Klein wants to unbuild a coalition with us.
You know what we should have done in World War II? We should have found the affable Nazis that we had some common ground with and allowed them into the coalition to end Nazism. It's so typically male. It's like, tell me you don't know anything about the broader scope of what it means to destroy reproductive rights without saying those words. Because anybody who knows anything about the fight that we have been in and the people that we take on at Abortion Access Front knows that the anti-abortion movement is a full-throated white supremacist movement. There's not parts of it that are cool.
And they are not compromising on their white supremacy. And they're not compromising on it being built on the back of women. And also these states that Ezra Klein pointed out that he wanted to make these coalitions with pro-life Democrats are places where the voters already said we are pro-abortion. So what the fuck?
Overwhelmingly.
The fuck?
If you can just casually take somebody's rights and just throw it out there as like something you're offering up somebody's rights. Which one of these, which Sophie's choice of a kid would you like when families are being torn apart by ICE? You know, maybe you should just give them one of your kids. Just give them one kid.
One of them.
Because, you know, compromise.
It's also really rich for a rich, white, straight, liberal man, to offer up examples of coalitions he would want to make that would not affect him negatively in any way.
Or think that the full emancipation of women isn't a betterment for him. That's the problem, right? It's saying your full emancipation doesn't matter to the greater good. And that is the work we have to do to literally school the Ezra Klein liberal men of the world and say, please understand what it means to have the government decide on some level that they have ownership of your body and in turn your destiny. Fuck you, Ezra Klein.
Second that, full-throated, fuck you, Ezra Klein.
So I did not want to come back into this being away for a while with that, but here we are. We have a lot to talk about. Okay, so let's get going with the steaming pile of this week's abortion news.
Well, RFK's demolition of scientific research continues, as this week he presented disproven data written on fish wrap that taking Tylenol while pregnant is causing autism.
Ugh. Trump slurred through the whole announcement, imploring pregnant Americans to stop taking it or stop giving it to your kids.
So, what do you think their next horrible recommendation will be? Well, don't tell Trump an actual fact like, I don't know, mifepristone is safer than Tylenol, because his logic-deficient ass would recommend that if you want to deliver a baby without autism, take mifepristone.
He would totally do that. Like, it's the one time we don't want to tell people mifepristone is safer than Tylenol. Oh my God, it's such a shit show. Anyway, 3 cheers to ProPublica because they are doing the most yet again. In an article titled, Texas Won't Study How Its Abortion Bans Affect Women, So We Did.
They discovered in a first-of-its-kind analysis that the sepsis rate in second trimester pregnancy loss hospitalizations increased by more than 50% after Texas's near-total abortion ban went into effect in September 2021.
We're still waiting on the data of an increase of sepsis on the body politic and whether it's safe to treat it with Tylenol.
Let's get our FBK minds on it. And finally, former Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy has a new memoir coming out, which is surely going to shoot him straight to number 2 on the worst person named Kennedy list.
Kennedy reveals, among other things, that his opinions on abortion were in diametric opposition to his personal views that life begins at conception.
He also says he almost resigned in the 90s because of this conflict, but was afraid to because, quote, his successor might be less concerned about protecting the unborn.
Kennedy instead waited 2 decades to resign, giving President Trump the opportunity to replace him with Neil Gorsuch, who is focused on both protecting the unborn and the born white. Woof.
Woo! It's been a crazy week, and the month is almost over.
The month is almost over. We have some cool stuff coming up this month. Before we get to our big meaty stories,
let's say what other business we have to take care of. What's going on in Minnesota?
Well, if you are in the Twin Cities, tomorrow, that's September 27th, we are going to be having a table at the Closer to the Edge Fest. That's Saturday, tomorrow, the 27th, from noon until 7 at Nicollet Park in Burnsville. This is a super cool, picnic, music, voter registration. You can meet a bunch of organizations and talk to them about how you can get involved. Pro-democracy organizers. It's really awesome. Plus, the music, forget about it. Chastity Brown, Katie Vernon's new band, Favorite Girl, and Reiki. There's a whole bunch of music and fun and activism. So bring a cooler, a picnic, your dog, make a day of it. We'll have free stuff to give out at that table, and you'll have a chance to volunteer with us in the Twin Cities.
Also, if you're in Brooklyn next weekend, I will be working the AF table at Atlantic Antic on Sunday, October 5th from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. This is such a great festival. It's full of food, music, vintage clothes, and fun. Did I mention food? Because the food is abundant. So it takes place on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn from Hicks Street to 4th Avenue, and we will be on the north side of Atlantic between Bond and Nevin. So come by, say hi, and as a treat, get a selfie with Anthony Comstock. You can get the details at atlanticav.org.
And if you're in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which I'm sure a ton of you are, come and see No One Asked You, the documentary about our work here at AAF. The Loverling Health Center, which provides comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, family planning, and gender-affirming care, will be screening the film at their Cheers for Choice fundraiser on October 9th at 5 p.m. at the Portsmouth Music Hall. Links to all of these activities will be in the show notes.
Ooh, the schnitz. Check us out.
All right, let's get to the stories we finally want to break down further because we have some meaty shit happening.
Okay, so last week, U.S. officials claimed that $10 million worth of contraception designed for low-income countries had been burned. And on top of that, there was this move to designate some of these methods of birth control as abortion. And if that was not enough, this week, RFK's FDA has picked up that musty, dusty bullshit doc masquerading as an abortion medication study as grounds to give mifepristone the Tylenol treatment. So, Liz, let's just take a look at how this is a 5-alarm reproductive fire, literally.
Oh my God, Moji, where are you going to start with the burning of the birth control?
This is crazy. It's $10 million worth of birth control that people can use that is perfectly valid.
Where was it stored?
It was stored in Belgium. It was in Belgium, and it was basically part of this dismantling of US aid. It was one of the stockpiles that were sitting around, and about a week or two ago, someone checked in about it and was like, hey, what's going on? And they were like, oh, we burned that shit.
And then turns out they didn't. And also, what's so frustrating is, first of all, to gut USAID is just terrible. Like, no one works there anymore. But there was organizations that were like, we'll totally buy this from you
Yeah.
so that we can get it to people. And the US was like, no, we would rather force pregnancy upon people than we would allow someone else to buy it and hand it out.
And the representative for USAID basically said, oh, President Trump is committed to protecting the lives of unborn children around the world. The administration will no longer supply abortifacient birth control under the guise of foreign aid.
Hold up.
Moji, you have just said a vocabulary word, and the word is abortifacient.
You know, it is the word.
Do you want to explain to people abortifacient?
So abortifacient is any substance that causes an abortion. And that essentially means that a pregnancy is ended after one has started. The thing is, these are not abortifacients because they prevent pregnancy, not end a pregnancy after it has started. And we know this is so because USAID is prohibited by law for paying for abortion. That's what the Hyde Amendment does.
Right. It's such a maddening lie, and they use abortifacient a lot. I mean, even when the Hobby Lobby case went before the Supreme Court, and they tried to say, our insurance plans shouldn't have to cover abortifacients. It's like, it doesn't. It covers birth control, IUDs, and Plan B morning after type of birth control. And it's just been allowed to lay there and be out there in the wild as though it's a real thing.
And antis use abortifacients. Generally, they cover things like hormonal birth controls. And it's a way also for anti-abortion politicians to say they are not going after birth control because they just reclassify birth control as abortifacients.
Right. And then everybody's like, yes, we should get rid of those abortifacients that they're storing. And it's just terrible. $10 million worth of birth control, long-acting IUDs, birth control, like all of that stuff that could be so helpful in underdeveloped nations and nations that are really living in poverty. And no.
Things that can allow people to choose their destinies, right? Things that can allow people to decide that they want to live their lives the way they need to, uninhibited by a pregnancy that they're not ready for. And basically the US is just like, fuck you.
Yeah. And this story got a lot of play. We were off last week when it happened, and a lot of really good reporting on it from Jessica Valenti, and a lot of people were talking about it. And of course, it's an outrage that our nation is destroying birth control that's already paid for, that's already in a warehouse to be sent out, and that they wouldn't give it to other organizations that would have gladly paid for it and distributed it. But what I find interesting is when we posted about it on our socials, another conversation came up around birth control and abortion.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting conversation to have because I think it's come up in other conversations we've had with actual allies, actual people in our movement. And that's about whether birth control, like what is the dividing line between birth control and abortion when you really believe that people's bodily autonomy is most important, and whether they choose to end a pregnancy that started or prevent a pregnancy from starting. Like, why would we get in the weeds about this?
Yeah, and there's people who really dig their heels in the sand, like we shouldn't differentiate it at all. I understand that point of view. I totally do. But what I do feel like is accessing abortion right now, like I don't care if you want to use abortion as birth control. It doesn't matter to me. It's not a harmful thing to do.
Not at all.
If you have a lot of money and that's how you want to deal with it, like go with God. But the truth is, it's easier to have access to prevent a pregnancy than it is to have access to end a pregnancy. And so that's where I make the distinction is access to abortion care is much harder. And also there's people who their moral compass says I would never have an abortion. So I'm very diligent about birth control. And if I got pregnant, then I would have a kid. And so for those people, like birth control is different for them. And so I think like for me anyway, looking at it in those terms, that's sort of where I land on it. Where do you land on it?
Well, I think that's important, and I 100% agree with you. If you want to use abortion as birth control and you can afford that, I love that for you. For me, I actually feel like the main reason that is important that we keep these distinctions is really because of the Hyde Amendment. That amendment basically bans the use of any federal funds for abortion, but it doesn't ban the use of federal funds for birth control. And so if you are on Medicaid, if you are in the armed forces, if you in some way need the federal government to fund your reproductive care, similar to what you were saying about access, you can get to birth control, but you maybe can't get to abortion as easily.
Right. And I think that that is super important to remind people all the time is, working in the systems we have and navigating the systems we have is very different than the systems we want. And we want to fight for the ones we want while having to navigate the ones that exist. I feel like that's a really good point to make. So, yeah.
I agree. Like I said in the beginning, the federal government is doing the most. So USAID is throwing away perfectly good birth control. And now the scientifically challenged want to look into the dangers of MIFI.
That's right. So as we said this week, the FDA is looking at mifepristone in light of, there's a study that came out in May. I don't even know if it's a study.
Study is a strong word.
It's a website that has information that is garbage, and we'll get to that in a minute. But basically, when Marty McCary was being questioned for his job as head of the FDA, he said, well, I'll look at all the data presented to me around the efficacy and safety of medication abortion, of mifepristone. And if any new studies come up that challenge that efficacy, I'll look at those too and maybe do a reassessment. Well, literally after he said that,
it wasn't even a month, Liz.
Boom, a study drops that is basically, it's gibberish on a website, an anti-abortion website.
Yes.
That challenges how safe the FDA says medication abortion is. So before we get to this bullshit study that makes them re-examine, I just want to lay out very quickly how safe and how effective and how studied medication abortion is. So France started development in 1980 of medication abortion. 8 years it took them to put it to market in France. 8 years of studies, of tests, of peer-reviewed science. Then 88 it goes on the market, became legal in the United States in the year 2000. So that means from 1988 until the year 2000, it had been used by people in Europe, people in France, people all over the place very successfully. Now it's been legal here for 25 years. It's gone through hundreds with an apostrophe S of peer-reviewed studies, and the total deaths that are adjacent to the 5.9 million people who have used it in that time span is 36. And that's not even like we can directly tie it for sure. That's ectopic pregnancies. That's people who have sepsis. That's a lot of things that happen that could have happened for various reasons that aren't the pill.
I bet you more than 36 people get hit by cars in the US every day.
Oh, 100%. So the anti-abortion movement is like, they're real mad that we have this solid science. So they started making up science and tried to get mifepristone pushed back to its original very strict protocols. And the Supreme Court was like, no, the data you presented has been recalled and is trash. You don't have standing to bring the case because you're lawyers and what are you doing? And also,
they don't have standings because it was like a dentist.
Yes, it was a dentist. And they also, the cases they did have where they cited 3 cases where somebody had harm from taking the medication. Turns out those 3 people did not get FDA approved medication. They got it from India through the mail. So just a whole lot of shit. So because that failed and the Supreme Court wasn't their friend on that, they realized the FDA needs to find some science so that they can dig around and say, oh, those hundreds of studies and these 5 million people who had no side effects, we need to look into this in a different way because there's new information. So Moji, let's talk about this.
This new information is horseshit. And we talked about this before in the pod when the information came in, but essentially they looked at insurance reporting and they were like, oh, this insurance reporting says that 11% of people who use the medication abortion experience a serious adverse event. I just want to say, A, what we have on the labeling now and what the FDA previously said is actually 0.5% of people had a seriously adverse event. And what they were counting as an adverse event included just visiting the ER. Not getting treated, just showing up and asking questions, or fully unrelated events like in the 45-day window that they counted from the first time someone reported taking a pill to 45 days, anything that happened in that window. You have an ankle sprain, oh my God, it's mifepristone's fault.
Or you maybe were unclear that when you're shedding your uterine lining, which is what you do when you take medication abortion, that there's going to be as much bleeding as there is. So you feel like taking an abundance of caution and going in, they count that as an adverse event.
They also said, according to their data, that there was a 10% failure rate for mifepristone, where the clinical studies have registered a 5% failure rate for mifepristone. And I say, even if it's a 10% failure rate, that's still better than condoms.
And also, who's participating in an anti-abortion clinical trial with these people? No one. So I'm going with the studies that don't have stigma and judgment, that have been studied, the hundreds of studies that we've done. And I don't know how many clinical trials they were,
Yes.
over 25 years.
Over decades.
And I'm going to say that the registered failure rate. And also, let's be clear, if there is a failure rate taking mifepristone, you go in and you have a D&C and they clean out your uterus.
Yeah.
So a failure rate
Yeah.
doesn't mean tragedy. It might mean that 5% of the time you have to go in and have your uterus evacuated.
Also, let's be honest, that failure rate probably in there is where their abortion reversal data sits, right? Oh, there's a failure. We gave you some extra progesterone. Now we have another bogus study we can throw at you. I'm sorry, Liz, I digress.
No, it's terrible. And also, just to be clear, the same procedure if you've ever miscarried and you have to make sure you don't get sepsis, so you have your uterus cleaned out, it's that procedure. So it's not some extra special procedure. It's nothing. It's making sure you don't get sick because you happen to have an incomplete abortion with pills.
What's really concerning to me, Liz, is that they are looking at this study and reviewing the data at all.
The fact that they would compare this, I'm air quoting, study by this crackpot organization called the Ethics and Public Policy Center with all of this other research is terrifying to me. And it makes me feel like we know how much data we have, right? But I don't feel very comfortable when it comes to like, how do we think this will come out in the wash? For a couple of reasons. One, this person who is now heading the FDA comes with massive anti-abortion bona fides. He's been on Fox News, literally saying somewhere between 15 and 20 weeks, babies will resist the instruments of abortion. It's like, what? He's spewing garbage. And he was heralded by James Dobson's outfit when he got nominated and for all the anti-abortion Catholics. So whatever and whoever he's speaking to in the anti-abortion circles, they were really excited about him taking over this job and doing exactly what they want the head of the FDA to do, which is to figure out quack science and roll back or completely abolish approval of medication abortion.
And this is also concerning me because recently, this month, the FDA moved away from what they've been using since 1971, which is an assembled expert panel to review drugs, right? This drug doesn't need reviewing. That's already happened. When they made this move, former FDA officials, academics, they were all like, wait a minute, this isn't how we do things. This is not actually how we have transparency. And I just think that doing that move and then deciding they're going to look at the research on mifepristone, there's no coincidence that these are happening in succession. And so these guys who can't be trusted, basically getting rid of the experts and then deciding to think mifepristone. I just feel like there's no coincidence in this timing. And it's really disturbing because there's so many terrible things that can happen, right? They could relabel Miffy, they could reclassify it, they could fully remove it from the market. Any of these things were basically going to undermine access for all of us.
And Moji, like this assault on reproductive care, let's be clear, it's happening in every branch of our government. And I'm so excited to transition to this week's guest because it's even happening in our armed services. If you need reproductive care, forget it. The bans are real and harmful. And like just this week, our uteruses have been Hegseth.
And here to talk about the Fox Weekend anchor and his latest assault on safety and the reproductive care of our service people is the CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Please welcome Dr. Kyleanne Hunter. Kyleanne, thank you for joining us. Hello.
Hey, Kyleanne.
Hi, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here today.
We are so honored to have you. We'd like to start by just having you tell us about your military background and what experiences framed your tireless advocacy against all the ways gender inequality presents itself in the armed services.
Absolutely. So I started out my career as a Cobra pilot in the Marine Corps. So that's attack helicopters for people who aren't familiar with them. It was as you can probably assume, a very male-dominated field. I was in the first very small handful of women who were winged into combat aviation and into Cobras in particular. And so it was an experience for me where I felt like I was living sort of these two dual lives, right? At the one hand, all I really wanted to do was fit in. And you start any new career, you're like, I just want to fit in. I want to show I can do my job well. I, just want to put my head down and sort of make it through these beginning times. But as I was going through that, I was starting to see that there were things that just weren't made for me, and it made it impossible for me to just fit in. Everything from the need and ability to go to the bathroom. Like, it's a shock. I think people were surprised that like women actually pee.
I've never heard of that. That's exciting.
Who would have thought, right? And so like the ability to be able to pee, right? You want to stay hydrated to do your job well. And there was not a meaningful mechanism for me to be able to do it as a pilot in the aircraft. Body armor didn't fit me appropriately and started to lead to injuries. I've got back injuries and leg injuries from body armor that didn't fit while I was sitting in the helicopter, and it would vibrate and rotate against my body, and that continual banging and vibration led to stress fractures and nerve damage that existed. And all of these things were used and weaponized against me personally as like, oh, well, you're weaker. You can't do the job as well. And when I actually got to the Hill and worked in the Marine Corps Office of Legislative Affairs is when I made the connection that like, oh, wait, these things that are happening to me are also a result of policy inequities that exist. And everything from the way that the policies are written for the military to acquire equipment, right? The acquisition pipeline didn't take women's bodies into account. The way in which purchasing was done never took the need to do anthropomorphic studies of women's bodies into account. So it was from that, I was like, oh, wait, I can do something about this, right? I can actually work to change this because women are the fastest growing population that is eligible to serve in the military, that want to serve in the military. Our country is safer and more secure for having women serve in the military. And if the military forces them to assume the trappings of male bodies, we are going to hurt them, and as a result, hurt our country as a consequence.
Also, just something simple like making sure armor fits is not something that affects combat readiness in terms of how the military works, right? Actually, it affects it more positively. Oh, everyone can fit their armor, and therefore it's protecting them.
Yeah, exactly. Like when we look at things like, ensuring gear fits you appropriately, that you have the right type of healthcare, that you are able to go pee when you're on like long days and missions, right? This improves everybody's combat readiness. The thing is, like, the athletic world has known this for a long time.
Right.
If you have sports bras that don't chafe, you're going to run better.
Yeah, also, every guy wear the same cups.
Like, that's 100% right? Like, are we expecting every man to wear the same cup? Are we expecting every man to wear the same size boots? Like, no. Right. And it makes everybody more ready if people are able to perform at the top of their ability.
I'm just also going to say there are different sizes of condoms. And then we're going to move on, right? So talking about like military readiness.
I mean, that could also be military readiness in some way here.
100%. And Kyleanne, the thing is, I feel like America has wholly been detached from who it is that's fighting and dying for our freedoms to begin with, right? So when you think about them, we almost never think about them as women. And so if you don't think about us, it's easier for those who don't want us there, A, to just not implement the things you just listed, but also to frame the role of women in the military as secondary or even worse, detrimental. So,
And that's a huge part of the problem. And I think it's sort of a three-pronged problem that we have. One is, particularly over the last 20 years, 25 years, really, at this point, where there have been these active conflicts that have gone on. And though we've withdrawn from Iraq and Afghanistan, we are still seeing ourselves sort of on a wartime footing again right now. And the American people have been given a pass where they can sort of rah, yay, we love the military, but never have to interact with any of us, right? And the military becomes more and more insular, which is a problem. The next piece is that for women in particular, and myself and Kate Hendricks Thomas actually wrote a book about this, that when women leave the military, they become the most invisible veterans, right? That it goes from being a very visible service member, right? You stand out, you are different. But as soon as you take the uniform off, it's like you never existed. And it's this continual effort to have to prove that you are in the military, prove that you are a veteran, prove that you are deserving of the earned benefits that this country is supposed to provide. And that again puts emotional labor, time labor, often economic labor on a population that's already disadvantaged. And so why would they, right? So you see women opting out of the system that way. And then third, if we look at who has been elevated in the press right now, it is these very anti-woman sentiments. The fact that we believe the opinions of someone who is now sitting in the Secretary of Defense role beyond the actual data and research, because we elevate sensationalized opinion and emotion much more over fact and research and logic and knowledge, which continues to put a detriment to the most vulnerable. I became a researcher, right? I went to get my doctorate because I firmly believe that data, evidence, research is what's needed to give voice to the voiceless and actually advocate for them, because you can dismiss one or two stories. You can dismiss a person as being, irrational. It is very difficult. I mean, people do dismiss data all the time.
I was going to say, maybe you haven't been paying attention the last 8 months.
We see this happen all the time, but it's on the record as being you're dismissing data. I testified at House Veteran Affairs in July, and a member of Congress actually took my testimony, stood up and said, there is too much data in here. It's not fair to us. If you're scared of numbers,
oh my God.
We are going to get back to the current defense secretary because that is an important topic. But I actually want to go to what you were saying about not just your book that you wrote, but you have written extensively about reproductive access in the military and have laid out with the data you have the cases to why not having abortion access for service members and veterans is a national security issue. Can you just explain, really in small words, for those not connecting the dots, how that works and why that is directly applicable?
Absolutely. So if we think about this being a national security issue, what's first and foremost important to note is that service members have very little choice over where they live. Right, which is what there's not you could put preferences in, but at the end of the day, it's up to the needs of whatever military service you are in as to where you go. And in the immediate aftermath of the Dobbs decision, myself and a RAND colleague, Sarah Meadows, ran this study, and we found that almost half of service women were stationed in a state that overnight had no access to abortion care. And when we put that in context of why it matters for the military, is that military women and veterans, and I'll get to veterans in just a moment on this, are more likely to have non-viable pregnancies for a whole host of reasons, are more likely to miscarry for, again, a whole host of reasons that exist, and also are more likely to be raped, just to put it bluntly, right? And so you're at a point where you have a population that requires medical care that is lumped into the colloquial term of abortion services and given and sort of demonized as this, on Tuesdays, all women go and get abortions because we think it's fun, rather than looking at this is an essential aspect of healthcare. As a military woman, you join the military, in military, anybody, right? Not even a woman, it's anybody in the military. You join knowing that there is a risk that you might die, right? You might die if you go downrange for combat. You might die in a training accident when you're here at home. What the Dobbs decision did was say, hey, woman in the military, if you have the audacity to want to start a family, you're now at risk of dying because it is more likely that you're going to have a non-viable pregnancy. And if you are stationed in a state that you had no control over, good luck if something goes wrong. You're more likely to miscarry. Good luck if something goes wrong. You're more likely to get raped. Good luck. Your rapist has more rights than you do at this point. I taught at the Air Force Academy for a while, and I had women who were commissioned out of the Air Force Academy turn down their pilot assignments and call me and say, ma'am, I've wanted to be a pilot my entire life. I have to go to Texas. When I get raped, my rapist is going to have more rights than me, so I'm turning down that pilot slot. And that, when we talk about it being a national security issue, the best and the brightest are opting out of key areas we need. These are women who are electrical and aeronautical engineers from the United States Air Force Academy who have wanted to fly fighter aircraft their entire life, are immensely qualified to do so, saying, no thanks, because of a decision like this.
And also take that times 50. Like if you are somebody who is like, I am so excited to have a career that serves my country. And now I have healthcare decisions being lobbed upon me that are going to force people who might promote me to say, well, I don't know, what if you get pregnant, or what if this happens to you, or what if that happens to you? It's this destroying the career path in totality for talented women like yourself who might want to decide how parenting works for them within the course of how they choose their career path.
Exactly. And I think, we've done it over the past 20 years in particular. There's been huge advancements made to the parenting conversation and have parenthood and military service become compatible with each other. Everything from expansion of parental leave for everybody, right? This is not just a women's issue. This is a family issue. And surprise, men have a stake in this as well.
Yeah, they're not just babysitting their kids.
Exactly. They're not babysitting. They are parents.
Parenting.
To expanded IVF and contraceptive access, to having contraceptives more easily available, to educating military and veteran healthcare providers on family planning topics. Right? We've made all this progress basically for 20 years because we recognize that we can't tell people when they come into the military, oh, you can never have a family. Right. And we need to make it easier, right, for people to hold both, right, to be parents and be good military service members. This is sending us way, way back. And that's not even to mention, when we talk about the veteran side, there is virtually no research into the impact of toxic exposure on pregnancies and women's reproductive health, right? And we've got with things like the PACT Act that we worked really, really hard to get passed. Again, anecdotally, what we're hearing is women who were exposed, they're having viability issues with pregnancies because of the exposures to their body, right? So again, and now we are telling women, oh, we're taking away healthcare from you too, right? Which is a harmful recruitment tool because again, if you go and you sign up and say, I know I am assuming the risk that bad things might happen to me, our country has a responsibility to care for those people when they get home. And there's not an asterisk there that say we care for you if you have a penis, right? Only, right? That's not it. There's no asterisk in that contract that I signed, right? And that millions of other women signed. And right now, the government is saying, oh, we're going to add an asterisk to who we're actually going to care for and how we're going to care for them.
Well, Kyleanne, I feel like that asterisk has been inserted by the current Secretary of, what are we calling it? Health? Or I don't know, but the whole thing is crazy. So I'm from Minnesota, and so is this person, Pete Hegseth, which is just morally reprehensible to me. But here we are. We have the Department of Defense being run by a Fox News weekend host and veteran who has never been part of leadership, who, from the sexual assault allegations to claiming women are not qualified to serve, to purging trans folks and queer folks from the military, he's shown disdain at the highest level of Black and brown people and women. And just this week, he has decided to disband the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services, a committee that was created to improve all the things you were just talking about. So, can you just tell us a little bit about what this part of the military does and why disbanding it is wholly disastrous?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of serving on DACOITS twice and chaired the Employment and Integration Subcommittee. And it was one of the biggest honors that I've ever had to serve on this committee. And it was deemed as a defense advisory committee for women in the services. And we looked at issues impacting women in the services, everything from having properly fitting protective equipment. And that's a big thing that we pushed for, to ensuring that there are effectively gender blind and gender neutral promotions that are done, right? So you aren't using the pronouns in how we promote people. And so people are just promoted as like, said name Marine or said name soldier, right? So then accomplishments, right? If you want to talk about something being merit-based, this is the committee that made the military more merit-based through the fact that people were promoted based on merit, not based on what the senior officer thought they looked like or could be like, and whether that was good or bad, right? That gear and equipment fit appropriately was very important. The access to parental leave issues, right? These are topics that the committee did. And as you mentioned, this committee was started in 1951. It had been around for over 70 years, almost 75 years of service. Over 96% of recommendations made by this committee were adopted, not adopted just by Democratic presidents or secretaries of defense, not just by Republicans, but across the board since 1951. Over 96% of recommendations had been adopted, and every single one of them made the military more merit-based, more lethal, if we want to use that term, and better for everybody who is serving in it. Because things that are often qualified as women's issues are, again, they are human issues. They are American issues. They are service members' issues. Having expanded access to healthcare benefits everybody. Forcing anthropomorphic studies of the current pilot population helped men be able to fit better in the cockpit as well. I know it's a shocker. And the other thing it did was all of these recruitment numbers that are being touted right now, like we're having record recruitment times, that's driven by women. It's driven by the fact that women want to join the military. It's also something important to note about military recruitment is the pipeline is very long. So it's not like these are people who decided to join necessarily in the past 8 months. Most have been in the pipeline for a year plus. But every single recommendation that the committee made was made with the best interest of this country and our nation's fighting force in mind. And disbanding it is going to leave a giant hole in our military. It's going to allow people to fall through the cracks. It's going to lead to people leaving the military because they aren't able to get equipment, gear, healthcare to meet their needs. And I worry that it is going to lead to more recruiting problems.
And basically what you were saying is just the general idea that when some of us get, like, when we're all free, right? It improves it for everyone. Just these baseline improvements in humanity, improve it for men, improve it for women, improve it for queer people, improve it for Black people, improve it for white people. And we want to know, how have moves like these in the military and this kind of behavior empowered those serving to think like them, or who think like them? Like, is there an escalation you found in the last few months?
I think especially when we're talking about Hegseth as a leader, right? Like just what he brings.
Yes.
The baggage that he brings. Just to your point, Moji, that tap on it is, do people feel afraid that the bad behaviors we've tried to correct will escalate because there doesn't seem to be accountability? And when your leader is from the top is bringing it in, what?
That's a huge concern. And it's a huge concern when we think about a lot of the adverse behaviors. I'll say as well, I served on the Independent Review Commission for Military Sexual Assault, and we made huge strides coming out of that commission with changes to the way in which sexual assault is prosecuted. We worked to make it easier for survivors to get benefits through the VA without having to go and retell their story time and time again. And we're starting to see those changes that we made questioned, dismantled, unfunded, which is leading to real concerns that what it is doing is given tacit approval for these behaviors to occur. Another thing that is really important, and Liz, this has actually been how we met, was when I was talking about this topic, is the wholesale firing of virtually everyone who's not a white man in the Flag Officer Corps that we're seeing. We've seen the firing of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who is a Black man. We saw a firing of the Chief of Naval Operations, who was a woman. We saw a firing of the Commandant of the Coast Guard, who was a woman. And there's never really reason given. And yes, there is always the prerogative for new administrations to come in. Every general serves at the pleasure of the president. But you've never before seen a firing like this with it being completely opaque, right? There's not rationale given. When you look at someone like Admiral Franchetti, who was the chief of naval operations, like she was a sailor's sailor, right? She grew up as an officer on a ship, a surface warfare officer, working some of the hardest jobs, both physically and intellectually demanding on a ship. And she got where she was because she was really good at her job and could lead. And you'd be hard pressed to find a sailor in the entirety of the Navy who said, oh yeah, she's a bad leader. And same thing with General Brown, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And yes, he was a black man. Yes, he talked openly about the struggles that he faced as a black man working through the bomber pipeline, which is it's a difficult pipeline for everybody. It's particularly difficult if you're different in any way, shape, or form, right? You have to overcome that. And we have to name those things as leaders so that we can fix them and we can correct them. And, Moji, as you said, when you correct these things, it rises all the tides, right? Like none of us are free until we are all free. None of us succeed until we all have the ability to succeed in this institution. And the firing of these people is incredibly, incredibly troubling and disheartening because it leads to a concern that it's just simply who you are, right? These immutable traits about yourself mean that you can't be a leader. Nothing to do with your merit, nothing to do with your skills and ability, nothing to do with how you've worked through a very difficult system that is very difficult for very good reasons. And there's a lot of concern, right? That this is going to undermine accomplishments. It's going to lead to worse behavior, and it's going to tacitly allow for beliefs that are detrimental to our national security.
Kyleanne, I'm really glad that you came. I feel like the vision of what a veteran is and what a service person are is often colored by the biases we're given. And so it's wonderful to have a woman come on and talk, who is a veteran, who is a combat veteran, coming on and talking about these. What can our listeners do? Like, how do we all, especially the activists listening to our pod, how do we all advocate in support of our veterans?
Absolutely. So one thing I will plug and encourage everyone to do, join and become a member of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Yes, we have veterans in our title, but we welcome everybody to be members, and you will get updates on, here are bills that are coming out that you should support. These are the issues. We're working on revamping our newsletter to have more veterans news everyone can use, right? So to really educate people as to what is happening, as well as we're going to be kicking off a speaker series starting in California, but we've got 12 dates around the country set up that we really want the public to come to, right? To better understand what is it to be a veteran? What are the biggest issues that are actually facing us today? And to come be part of the solution, right? Because we can't do this alone. Right now, there are 2 bills that are in the House that have been introduced in the House Veterans Affairs Committee that we should be pushing for. The Veterans Families Health Services Act, which expands family planning services to the VA and has everything covered regardless of the types of injuries. And this gets super wonky when you look at just what types of injuries tend to be covered right now. This basically says if anything affects your ability to have normal reproductive anything, right? Like to include things like PTSD and military sexual trauma, which, yes, your actual organs may not have been damaged. They may have been, right? But there are other concerns there, as well as the Reproductive Freedom for Veterans Act, which would reinstate abortion protections for all veterans through the VA. And this is something that I think is very important for listeners to know too, that like, yes, I am a woman who is here and I'm very passionate about this. But when we surveyed our members, which are post 9/11 veterans, after Dobbs, close to 70% of them said the VA and the DoD need to step in and ensure abortion access remains for veterans in the military. And that's not 70% of our women veterans. That's not 70% of our Democratic activist veterans. That is 70% of our veterans across the political spectrum that we have. And when I pulled things out by self-identified political parties, looking at the data, because I'm a big data nerd on this stuff, our self-identified Republicans were just as passionate about this as our self-identified Democrats, right? So this is something that the veteran community knows should not be political. It should not be a political issue or topic. This is a human topic, and we need to care about our fellow humans.
You're saying bodily autonomy is popular with veterans?
It also shows the disconnect between the leadership like Hegseth and that the core of the veterans and those who are serving view people who have capacity for pregnancy as equal soldiers and partners and want them to be there. So that is a super good positive message to leave on. Will you please join us again when these things come up? You're simply the best.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we're going to link to where you can call your representatives about that. We'll link to IAVA and all of it. Kyleanne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kyleanne.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyleanne. And please, folks, contact your members of Congress to support the Reproductive Freedom for Veterans Act and the Equal Access to Contraception for Veterans Act. For those who want their voices heard, you can also join IAVA's Cavalry. That is the civilian link where you can just be interested, learn about what's going on in advocacy and how you can help support soldiers who are currently serving and our veterans.
As always, these stories will be in the show notes, and you can find the best, most up-to-the-minute resources on accessing abortion care and funding for your care on our website, aafront.org. Our Charlie chatbot on the bottom right will walk anyone, anywhere in the country through their options and resources for abortion.
You know, we do this show because this information is not given enough attention in the media. So help us spread the word and show us some love by liking, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating. Every bit helps us reach more listeners, and that means more people in the fight.
And now, the party game that's faster than Monopoly and more fun than Taboo. 6 degrees of abortion. And this is when I take a story from the news, and Liz has 6 chances to link it to abortion. So let's see if I can stump her this week. This week, Liz, I think it's kind of fun. M&M's has announced a new flavor. It's a honey peanut flavor. And so the question is, in 6 chances or less, link M&M's to abortion.
M&M's the candy?
Yeah.
Wow. M&M's, not M&M.
Not M&M the rapper. No. The candies.
Okay, this might be a fucking stretch, okay? And I don't even know if it's real. But M&M's are made by Mars, the Mars Corporation, which I don't know if they still are, but they used to be a company with Wrigley, gum, like Wrigley gum. Okay. So Wrigley Field
Wrigley gum, yeah,
is the Wrigley candy airs, and the Metro where we do our abortion fundraising shows in Chicago is across the street from Wrigley Field.
I will take that.
What else would it be?
I thought you were going to go a much easier way, which is a scant 2 or 3 years ago, Tucker Carlson kept going on and on about the green M&M when she changed her shoes.
Oh, but was that abortion related? Or he just hates abortion?
Well, he's abortion related. He hates abortion. He gets us to abortion. But he went on for weeks about how unsexy the M&Ms are.
Oh, right.
And how they were part of the feminist agenda. And it's the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. Anyway.
I remember that.
Yours was pretty badass, though. I'm actually really impressed. That was pretty dope.
Yeah, well, I'm old, so I remember when Mars and Wrigley were like a thing. So, okay, I win. Woo, I'm back, baby. Woo-hoo! We did it. All right, should we move on to our guest?
Let's please.
Our next guest is the guest of the moment because her jam is navigating trauma with laughter. She's written a book about it. She has a podcast and a solo show about it. And we are going to mine her brain about how to navigate all this shit and laugh and cry at the same time while doing it. Please welcome the hilarious Youngmi Mayer.
Hello.
Hey, Youngmi.
Hi, how are you? How are you doing?
We are good. We're so happy to have you. And we're extra happy to have you because, this is a podcast that uses a lot of humor to talk about abortion and essay and a lot of crazy shit that we go through. And you actually are somebody who is the queen of doing that kind of thing. And it's always one of those things where it's kind of like there's something in your life that you realize humor can get you through something super hard. I wanted to know, because you're such an expert, was there a time that you first discovered, wait, if I laugh through this, it really helps?
I think that practice, or I kind of call it a coping mechanism, was taught to me before I even understood what I was doing. I feel like that's probably one of the first things that I learned, because it was like my mom like spanking me, and then she's like, ha ha, you broke the wooden spoon because you're so fat. Like that was like one of her old jokes. Like that was like my introduction to that. And I think, I mean, that, like that happened before I even understood that I was coping with the trauma.
Moms are good like that. It's usually a mother that will guide you into your comedy career.
They really do.
You sort of started answering that question with you as a child, but how has that evolved as you've grown? And is it helpful, or do you find you're using it to navigate the ongoing existential crisis that is literally living in America in 2025?
I think that evolution into adulthood with that kind of humor sort of ingrained in me as a child was a journey, because, living, I think everyone goes through this. You grow up in your family, so you don't know that your family's fucked up. And so then you think that everything is normal. And then you become an adult and you walk out into the world and they're like, why are you laughing? Somebody just got hit by a motorcycle. And you're like, oh, okay. That's weird. I'm not supposed to do that. Okay. And so then I had this journey of going into the real world, realizing people don't do that. And then hiding that and being unsure of when I should do that. And then sometimes they'll pop up and people will laugh. And then I'm like, oh, these are my people. And then as I got older, I realized, oh, the point of life is just to be yourself, and you find your people. You don't have to hide who you are. And so I think my relationship to that, the evolution, is just understanding that's how I was forged in the fire of getting roasted by my mom. And then that's it. I am whatever came out of the fire. I'm a hardened, I like to think of myself as a weird metal, tchotchke, not like a sword, just something weird and useless.
Like a gnarled iron branch.
But can I say something about the abortion thing?
Always.
That's the one thing that people are so weird about. They just, even the most liberal people, they're like, we gotta act like we're sad about it. And I'm like, I fucking love abortion.
Yes.
You are sitting here with some joyous abortion havers here. Also, our anti-abortion protesters tell us it's so, but I have actually not met a person who regrets their abortion.
I
haven't either. Don't you feel too like the way that society tries to tell us to talk about abortion should be sort of the guidepost for all of this shit that's happening, because it's like it takes away your personal feeling about it,
Yeah.
and something is crammed into you about how you're supposed to feel about something. I'm going to say the world we're living in now, the Charlie Kirk thing, that shit also popped up, right? Where it's like, don't tell me how to feel about an oppressor.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't tell me how to feel. I will not cow to society's preconceived notion of how you're supposed to mourn when someone died. And how someone died, to me, has nothing to do with how they lived if they were an oppressive asshole. Those are separate.
Yeah, I think my whole approach to humor with things like abortion, even the Charlie Kirk thing, I wrote a memoir, and the focus of my memoir was about how I grew up in Korea. And in Korea, even though it's a Christian country because they were indoctrinated by white missionaries, for thousands of years it was a country that ran on Taoist and Buddhist and Confucian principles. So growing up there, I didn't realize this, but whatever a country's foundational philosophies are or religion is, that is baked into you without even knowing. So growing up in Korea, I had more of a Taoist idea of nothing is either good or bad, right? And this is what the memoir is about. And so in the whole thing where I laugh when I should be sad, I feel like that's a very Korean thing, because culturally it's a Korean thing, and nobody thinks it's that weird to laugh at a funeral or cry at what's the normal one?
I don't know.
You normally cry at a funeral, I think.
I love that you assume we're normal. That's so cute.
Yeah.
So in Korea, there's more of a looser idea of what you're supposed to do at a certain life milestone. And they have this understanding that, yeah, some people cry at birthdays because, yeah, birthdays are happy, but it's also sad because that's one day closer to death. Or a wedding is happy, but it's also sad because that marks the end of your childhood or your singledom, or your independence. And a funeral is sad, but then also it's happy because your grandpa was kind of racist. It's they have that understanding, right? And so for me, when people bring up abortion and they're like, you have to only be sad, or like Charlie Kirk was a Christian man, so you have to only be sad. It's like, no, there's no event in life that is only bad or only good. It's always a combination of the two.
What do you guys think it is about humanity that it forces us into emotional boxes all the time?
Is it humanity or is it society, Liz? Because I feel like that's the question.
Well, society, it is.
I think it's Christianity.
You think Christianity sets those rules? It's just an emotional binary that we have to follow?
I would agree. I think Christianity does a lot of the heavy labor of making us like believe that we have to perform things in a certain way.
Yeah, it literally says like God is good, Satan is evil. Those are the only two options. Like, like that's it. Yeah.
Heaven or hell.
Yeah.
But I do think, I'm glad you brought that up about abortion, because we can't say it enough that emancipation is joy. And like, unless we look at abortion as emancipation, people get to heap all sorts of shit on it and make it negative.
You were the first guest that we've had who had their abortion in South Korea that we're aware of.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Because that's new for us.
What I didn't know, and this is really interesting, was at the time it was illegal. Abortion was illegal in South Korea.
You didn't know that?
I didn't, because, this is like another thing that's like kind of difficult to explain unless you have lived there. So South Korea is like one of these countries where on paper it looks extremely conservative. There's laws against adultery. Like you can go to jail for adultery. There was a law that women couldn't smoke outside until 1997.
But they could smoke inside. We just can't see it.
On paper, Korea looks very conservative and very rigid, but in practice, they rarely ever enforce those laws. And it's very different than like in America. You never see a policeman. They never bother you. Like even if you're drunk and you punch a policeman in the face, they're just like, okay, calm down. And then they just send you home. Like it's very mildly policed. So laws are not enforced. And so when I had an abortion there, I literally went to the corner OBGYN and I was like, I think I'm pregnant. And then she did an ultrasound. She was like, you're pregnant. She was like, weekly tried to be like, do you want to keep it? But then I was like, no. And she was like, okay. Like, and then that was it. I got an abortion. I didn't have insurance, but healthcare is subsidized in South Korea and it's very advanced there. So I think it was total $350.
$3.50?
3 million won, which is 45 cents. I'm just kidding.
Plus tip.
Yeah, it was plus tip. Approximately like $350 US dollars. And that was in 2005.
I think it's really cool that you had an abortion that was illegal and you just kind of didn't know because it was essentially a nothing burger.
Yeah, in Korea, they're just like, oh, we don't pay attention to the law. Who cares? Like,
So when you started writing the book, it's really hard to write a book, right? And you just like have imposter syndrome and you are reevaluating whether or not you think what you're putting in the book is going to have an impact. When you were like, okay, I'm going to lay this out and here's what I want people to know after they read my book. Well, how would you answer that?
I guess the thing that I touched on, these like foundational core beliefs that we think are inherently part of who we are as people. Like, I think the fact that I grew up in Korea until I was 20 and I moved to America, and I thought I was very Americanized because in Korea, I grew up going to international school. My dad's white. And so I thought I was very American culturally, but then I realized that there are so many core beliefs that I had from my Korean culture. And moving here, I was like seeing how different American people behave in like very things that you would think that are like just inherently part of like your core identity. It's so heavily impacted by this like abstract concept of your culture and society. I think that is always the thing that I wanted people to see from my book. And then also the fact that laughing and crying are the same thing, like they come from the same place and they exist because of the other.
But it made me want to think about like when you were like, oh, wait, I'm not as American as I thought I was. Like, where did you land on identity? Like, how did you navigate your own feelings of who you are and how do you navigate it?
I think there's a lot of ways that it's maybe uniquely difficult for me because like I said, I'm biracial and I'm from two cultures and also my background doesn't really sound like even the typical biracial person story, because that's usually like my white dad and Asian mom met at Stanford, and that's like not my story. But I guess it's like uniquely difficult because that identity, there's not a lot of like, everyone talks about representation. Like, there's not a lot of people I can look up to and be like, well, there's a biracial person that fucking, but also I think because it was a little bit more unique, it was easier for me to quickly come to the understanding that no matter how similar you are to people or like a group of people or a culture or how different you are, there is like a foundational thread, that everyone has. And so I think because my life looks so different than a lot of people, I was able to get to the important part quicker, which is we are all kind of the same, not in the racist white people, like I don't see color thing, but like there's like some very deep inherent things that we all experience. So
I feel like our humanity is pretty central to all of us.
I want to ask you, Youngmi, in this world we're living in where people are laughing and crying simultaneously because it's on fire, what advice do you give people when they're feeling guilty about having simultaneous emotions? Like, what's the pep talk?
I'm going to say something very therapy-y that I think my friend actually told me, not my therapist, and it blew my mind. This is before I was in therapy, and I think I was like in my mid-20s. I remember this so clear. She said, emotions are not rational, and so they can just happen, and it doesn't have to make sense, and it doesn't have to be right. Emotions are not right or wrong. It's just your body responding. And so there's nobody that can say, hey, it's wrong for you to laugh at a funeral. No one can judge you for having an emotion because they exist outside of morality and intellect, and they happen naturally. So you can't judge anyone for having an emotion. You can't judge people's emotional reactions unless they're punching you in the face. That's illegal. And then in yourself, you can't judge yourself for whatever emotional reaction you have. You just have to try to understand why, lovingly.
Those feel like wise words.
I think that's good advice. Let your emotions happen because they're part of who we are. That's really good advice. Youngmi, where can people find you?
You can find me on social media at YM everywhere. And on TikTok, I'm Youngmi Mayor.
And how can people support your work? Because like that's where they find you, but like you got shit happening.
Okay, so I have been doing a Substack recently and I really enjoy it. And, I have a book, I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying. But if you like the book, you can read my Substack. It's basically me just workshopping a lot of ideas that I might put into a second book. And so, it's kind of a way to see that process. And I also have a one-person show at Joe's Pub. I have a residency in the fall, and then the next shows are September 30th and October 1st.
Amazing. We'll put the links to all of the things in our show notes. Youngmi Mayor, you are hilarious. You're also super insightful, and you're really fun to talk to. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Check out Youngmi's Substack at youngmimayor.substack.com. And if you're in New York next week, don't miss her one-person show, Hairy Butthole at Joe's Pub, September 30th and October 1st. And you can follow all things Youngmi at youngmimayor.com. All of this will be in the show notes.
That's our show.
That is our show. Wow.
Thanks for listening. Thanks again to Kyleanne Hunter. Oh, so good. Make sure to support her bills before Congress and get involved in the IAVA's cavalry if you want to make your voice heard. Links will be in the show notes.
Did we make you smarter today? Show us some love by liking, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating. Plus, stay connected with us every day on social media at Abortion Front across all platforms. Again, with your help, we can get more people to learn about this assault on abortion access and take action.
Also, browse our awesome Operation Save Abortion trainings at operationsaveabortion.com. You can get an abortion activist glow up and learn about all the areas abortion providers and patients need your help.
Plus, our super cool activist calendar is also there, and it's chock full of local and national actions and educational opportunities that you can take. Go to operationsaveabortion.com.
We've also got a great mutual aid program at Abortion Access Front called Adopt a Clinic, where you can help support independent clinics, abortion funds, clinic escort groups, and patients directly by ordering much-needed items from an org's wish list.
That's right. This week, we're highlighting Charlotte for Choice in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're looking for everything from fans because it's boiling hot there to menstrual pads to snacks. Link in our bio or at aafront.org.
And if you want to get more involved, specifically with AAF, we need you. Sign up to volunteer at our website, aafront.org, and we can figure it out together.
Join us next week when we have an incredible guest, Colombian abortion activist Eliana Rodriguez. I met Eliana in Colombia recently when I was there screening the No One Asked You documentary for the International Human Rights Film Festival. And Eliana was a tireless activist in the Green Wave movement that brought Colombia from a total abortion ban to legal abortion. We chatted about why she got involved, the dangers of getting involved, trying to fight for abortion in a super Catholic country, and all of the cool tactics they use that really helped turn the tide of public opinion and gave them more rights to have an abortion than we have in the United States right now. She is awesome.
I cannot wait to hear about that conversation. Plus, comedian, writer, and actress Jenny Zagrino joins us to chat about her upcoming afterbirth comedy tour and her 1-hour Comedy Central special titled Gen Z. That's Jen with a J.
Yeah, you know what? It's a pun.
It is a pun. I love a pun.
I love a pun. I love a pun. Works a little bit better writing than saying, but we're doing great. Also, if you love us, please join our Patreon. You'll support great content, get cool merch, and experiences. All pledges support this pod and all of our activism at Abortion Access Front. Pledge at patreon.com/feminist buzzkills. FBK is edited by Remy DeTournay and is produced by Jin Moon for Abortion Access Front.
We leave you with a message from our friends at Plan C Pills. Unplanned pregnancy is one of life's unexpected twists, and in this age of restrictions and confusing online information, it can be difficult to know where to turn.
PlanCpills.org shares up-to-date information on options for abortion pills and virtual support in all states with a focus on how people are getting pills by mail.
The site also shares information on how people are getting pills delivered in advance to store at home in case of future need. Visit PlanCpills.org. That's PlanCpills.org to learn more.
This message is offered as a public service of the Feminist Buzzkills podcast and Plan C, a 10-year-old nonprofit initiative.
Woohoo!
That's it. That's the show. Thanks, everybody.
Feminist Buzzkills, the podcast from Abortion Access Front. New episodes drop Friday. When BS is poppin', we pop off. And if you want to support our podcast and all the work of Abortion Access Front, like, subscribe, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills.